I'm Rachel Riley, and you're listening to the Power of Us podcast, brought to you by Legal & General. In this episode, we're asking, what can we do to make technology work for us, rather than us working for technology? Our eclectic trio to take this on are Craig Bennett, CEO of the Wildlife Trusts. Hi, Craig.
Hello there.
Thank you for joining us. We have also Ruby Hines, a recent graduate who studied maths at the University of Manchester. Hi, Ruby, and congratulations.
Thank you.
And last but not least, we have Cynthia Bullock, Deputy Director at UK Research and Innovation. Thanks for joining us, Cynthia.
Hi.
What defines good technology for you? I'll start with you, Cynthia.
Tech clearly has a huge amount of value, and tech has the potential to improve a huge part of our lives and ensure that we are active and independent and socially connected and productive. But we think fundamentally that it shouldn't replace human interaction. We don't think it should be in place of human care. We think that human values should be the driver for technological need. And more importantly, that success of any technological interventions should really be measured by its positive social impact and should not exacerbate inequalities.
So for you, good tech simply improves our lives. That's what it's designed for. And bad tech takes away some element of human interaction.
Absolutely.
Ruby, would you go along with that?
I think tech is a tool, and good tech would use the tool for good so that it can't be used as a platform for the bad things that people talk about, like lack of human interaction, or a platform for, scams or crime. So good tech would be a tool that's used for human progression.
Do you think tech is ever designed with bad intentions? Do you think people who design tech are ever aware that their invention could end up being used for bad? And do people always have benevolent reasons for inventing it in the first place?
I'm not sure if anyone would say that they've invented something for bad specifically, but people will always find a way. The black market still exists in real life and in tech because people have found a way to do it. And I think the internet was probably created as just a virtual space where everyone can be equal, but people will always find a way to use it for the things they want.
Craig, we'll start with the basic question again. What is good technology, and what does bad technology mean to you?
I think good technology has to help us meet an unmet need. But I would also say that in the 21st century, it's really clear that technology that is designed in such a way that exacerbates social and environmental problems is just badly designed technology. I mean, any good tech designer will look at the wider context in which that technology needs to operate.
So can you give us an example of badly designed technology?
If we look right back, say, to Concorde in the 1960s and 1970s, for example, in one sense, that was amazing technology, very clever, and it's very hard to deny that, incredible technological breakthroughs in that. But equally, it was very much done in a silo. The clear focus was just fly a plane, supersonic speed. And clearly what we can't do with technology in the 21st century is just have the luxury almost of thinking about those needs in those kind of very isolated silos, because then you get technology that causes all these other problems, as Concorde did. So actually what we have to do is recognise good technology has to look at multiple issues and make sure that it's able to operate in that wider context. Otherwise, it's just technology in theory, really, rather than practice. So I think you can have technology that might be really good and clever in one aspect, but I mean, actually, if it doesn't work in the wider world, and in other words, if it ends up causing social and environmental problems, that's badly designed technology.
Yeah, planes get us where we're going much quicker. So on one side, there are benefits, but on the other side, there's the environmental and economic impact. Do you think there is such a thing as benevolent tech that just has a good side?
A lot of it comes back to being really clear what the need is. Transport technology is a really good example of that. Is designers can get stuck in a paradigm of thinking, how can we go faster? How can we get from A to B faster physically? And obviously there's always going to be a bit of a need for that. But actually, if we kind of step back and think, what's the real need? The real need is people connecting to each other. During lockdown, because of COVID, actually people suddenly realising that we can connect to each other sometimes better without having to travel at all. And often when you get I would say, bad technology developed, or technology developed, that's sort of actually answering a question from the past rather than one from the future. And that's why we often see an obsession across big kind of technological infrastructure projects. Exactly this example, getting from A to B faster, when a lot of our broadband in this country, particularly rural broadband, is still not up to the speeds we should be doing. So we're often stuck answering the question from the past rather than the question from the future.
Ruby, do you think there are any examples that we can just put aside and say, you know what, this is good tech, we like that?
A lot of attention gets paid to communication technology specifically, and then it's not really talking about other things that might need addressing. So I think all of tech could use some work.
Cynthia, tech itself is obviously, it's inanimate, of course. So can tech itself be at fault, or is it human usage of tech that's to blame, or is it actually the human designers that turn good technology into bad technology?
I think there is a responsibility on designers, certainly, to think about the potential to actually exacerbate issues. So if we look at the social connection piece, absolutely, FaceTime and Zoom and Teams have all supported us through the pandemic in terms of helping to maintain social connection. But at the same time, if it suddenly means that people choose to stay home, isolated, rather than venture outside their house to meet people face to face, that isn't particularly great for community engagement or cohesion.
A good piece of technology has to be usable. We need to include everyone in society, don't we?
Absolutely. You need a diverse user group. My area is around how we support older adults to remain active and productive and independent. So tech needs to be for all, and it can't by its design digitally exclude others, because we know that in itself exacerbates inequality.
Ruby, you're a recent graduate in maths. Do you find there's a generational difference between people who are graduating right now and parents and possibly grandparents?
I think so. I had a certain amount of tech education in school and how to use the internet safely and things like that. And my parents, when they're using their laptops, they might ask me how to get rid of all the adverts because they're annoying them or they've got targeted ads. But I have had an ad blocker installed on my Google Chrome extension since I was like 15. So I think like there's a different way I navigate the internet and the technology I use. And one thing perhaps worth noting in response to what Cynthia was saying about using FaceTime and Zoom over lockdown, and then it's obviously a bad thing if we then choose to avoid human interaction as a response to that. A lot of people who I know who are still at university clearly value human interaction and human teaching very highly, because now lots of lectures and things are online and people aren't really happy about it. They value the human interaction.
And Craig, at the Wildlife Trust, I imagine it's all about human interaction. It's all about being at one with nature. So how do you use technology in your role?
In one sense, obviously, what people really want to do is, as you say, connect to nature. And actually, that's become even clearer during lockdown. But it's interesting how people are keen to use technology to try and do that. So, for example, we've seen a 2,000% increase in visits to our webcams from our nature reserves during lockdown. And I don't think any of those people are saying that's the end of it, that they're happy just to look at a webcam. I think that's in addition to them visiting nature firsthand as well.
I've heard from members of the public with mobility issues who've actually said that they've felt way more connected during lockdown thanks to the online connectivity than they ever were before, because they're not physically able to go to places. They're not able to go to the theatre, for example. So being able to see theatre shows on their screens has been brilliant for them. Cynthia, do you think that you'll be going back to the way things were, if that's even possible?
I don't think we can go back. And actually, some of the employers who were absolutely adamant that they couldn't deliver their service from home suddenly found that they could. And I gather there's some sort of statistics that shows that actually productivity has improved through this time. And invariably, people end up working much more than they would because they're working in much more flexible ways. I have a 3-year-old, so I do a little bit, and then she comes back from nursery and we do a little bit with her, and then, I go back to work, and then I might pick up a bit more work sort of when she's gone to bed at 8.
Craig, are you going to be going back to how things were?
No, I don't think so. the trends that will stay are the trends that were already happening before lockdown, but lockdown has just given a huge boost to them. There's very few people that would want to work in the office 5 days a week, and there's very few people that necessarily want to work 5 days a week from home. People would like to do something like half and half, or a third one way or 2/3 the other way, because they do want the interaction face to face with colleagues occasionally. What we need to do in the future is go to offices as a place where people kind of collaborate, and I think that will become a lot more loose in the future, even if suddenly we all got a vaccine tonight.
Yeah, I think we've realised that we were way behind where the technology is with a lot of things. Cynthia, have you found that companies are trying to do things where legislation won't actually allow them to at the moment?
Innovators will always push the boundaries and will aim to try to incorporate as much value as they think they can in any product that they're developing. There's a piece around how it's used to make sure that it is used in a way that recognizes the diversity in population. So if I reflect on your question around, would something that allows us to do a virtual handshake be great, and a virtual hug, then we'll have to imagine that if you're wanting to deploy something like that in a place like Japan, then actually a handshake isn't great. You'll have to do a virtual bow of sort. So it's that cultural piece, which is quite a sophisticated thing to try and incorporate within any technological development that is really, really critical.
That's a very interesting point you've raised there about cultural differences and the tech needing to include everyone, because you think of tech as inanimate and unbiased, but we've seen examples of face recognition working much better on Caucasian faces than Black and Asian faces. We've seen that voice recognition works much better with male voices. So how do we make sure that the tech is inclusive and considers everybody?
To answer that question, you have to go beyond the tech itself and think about issues around ownership and control and who's going to benefit from it. And obviously then issues of access and inclusion and absolutely considering diversity in developing it. And I think the point about that is if you're putting a tech development team together, the more diverse that team is itself, the more likely it is then that technology will be developed in such a way that it is inclusive. A lot of this comes back to issues, as ever, which are not about technology itself, but around how the world economy and our society and politics are wired more generally. And when you get tech working for the masses and for society as a whole, it's normally when it has been developed in a way that puts those issues into consideration.
I think often balancing inequality goes back to education. So I'll turn to Ruby, having just graduated. When I finished my maths degree, I was 1 in 6 in my college. I was the only girl studying maths. Is it getting better?
On my course, certainly, there was a disparity, perhaps not quite as bad as 1 in 6, but definitely notable. There is an awful lot of directing STEM students to tech careers and finance careers. And as Craig was saying, it's not the tech itself. It's quite reductive to blame tech for issues like the voice recognition thing.
So tech's just a reflection of humanity. Are we getting into the broader philosophical question of whether we can fix tech before we can fix humanity?
I suppose, yeah.
I'll go back to Cynthia. Do you think it's possible for legislators to troubleshoot technology before it takes off? I mean, how do we make sure that there's a level playing field between the people designing the tech who could potentially just be using it to make money and the people making the rules to try to protect people in general?
Some of this, I think, goes back to the initial question, should it just be STEM students that go into tech? And I think fundamentally that it shouldn't. And I fundamentally think that there needs to be a role for social sciences and behavioral scientists and designers supporting your sort of STEM colleagues in the development of tech. If all of those disciplines are bringing their breadth of knowledge and wisdom in terms of our understanding of social and cultural issues, as well as the sort of more maths and IT sort of awareness in the development of tech, I think we stand a much better chance of ensuring that we're extracting the beneficial values that we can from tech.
Craig, going back to you, you mentioned that when you go on holiday, you just turn off your social media. So how do we as users get the most of our technology? Do we need some kind of social contract?
Yes, I do think we need some kind of social contract. It's hard to know exactly what it would look like, but I think it's going to become an ever more important question for the simple reason that the pace of innovation is speeding up all the time. Technology is developed and then we've kind of tried to retrofit controls and regulations around it to deal with perhaps some of the ill effects of technology that is also causing beneficial things for society. You know, that classic kind of Dr. Ian Malcolm quote from Jurassic Park when they're all sitting around the dining table and hearing about how the dinosaurs were kind of created. He said, he said, your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could, they didn't stop to think if they should. And surely that is a question that's going to become ever more relevant through the 21st century.
Yeah, I think we've come to some kind of consensus. We like technology. We can use it for all kinds of wonderful things that we never even dreamed of. But we do need to keep more of an eye on it to make sure that it's inclusive, that it doesn't do bad things. And we also need to make sure that the legislation keeps up with what the tech is actually being used for in the present rather than what it was originally designed for.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think we need to keep up with what tech's doing because a lot of tech isn't being used for what it was designed for.
And another thing we agree on is that tech shouldn't just be for techies. We all use it, whether you're old, young, from different parts of the world, we're all using it. And we need all kinds of people as well as diverse expertise to make sure that the tech is purposed in the right way.
One of the other things we really do need to do is to be honest that tech won't do everything. It won't induce a behavior change. If I'm not going to the gym to do regular exercise, then giving me a Fitbit isn't going to make any bit of difference, right? So there's a whole piece about me as an individual being able to understand my motivations for using tech, understand the way that my ability to control my behavior, my emotions, my thoughts can be influenced by tech, and genuinely use it in such a way that I'm extracting value for myself and society as a whole and the community that I live in.
So that comes down to keeping an eye on the tech, not just in terms of possible legislation, but also as an individual.
Absolutely, yes. We all have a responsibility.
Well, thank you very much for joining us, Craig, Ruby and Cynthia. You've been listening to the Power of Us podcast hosted by me, Rachel Riley, and brought to you by Legal & General. Next week, we'll be looking at the big one, climate change. What can we all do to safeguard the future of our planet?